The woman walked into the courtroom like she owned it, not with arrogance, not with swagger, with something far more terrifying: absolute certainty. Every eye in Chicago's Federal District Court, Courtroom 1812, followed her down the center aisle. The reporters in the gallery leaned forward, their pens hovering. The defense attorneys shifted in their expensive chairs. Even the bailiff, a 20-year veteran who had seen everything, stopped breathing for a half-second. But the only person in that room who truly understood what was about to happen was the man sitting behind the elevated mahogany bench in his flowing black robes. Judge Raymond Holloway. And when the woman's eyes, cold, piercing, the color of deep ocean water, locked onto his face from across the crowded room, the color drained from his face so completely, so instantly, that the court reporter actually asked if he needed medical attention. He didn't need a doctor. He needed a miracle, and miracles don't visit men like Raymond Holloway. Raymond Holloway had been called many things over his 26 years on the federal bench. The hammer, that was the press's favorite. Chicago Tribune had used it in a headline back in 2009 after he handed down back-to-back maximum sentences on a Monday morning without so much as looking up from his docket. 40 years, 45 years, back-to-back, before his morning coffee had gone cold, the glacier. That was what the defense attorneys whispered among themselves in the marble hallways of the Everett McKinley-Dirksen United States Courthouse. Because Raymond Holloway was cold, yes, but more than that, he was slow-moving and unstoppable. Once he decided the direction a case was going, no argument, no evidence, no tearful testimony from a broken defendant's family moved him 1 millimeter. Your Honor. That was what everyone said to his face because everyone was afraid of him. At 61, Raymond looked precisely like what a corrupt federal judge was supposed to look like if Hollywood had designed the role specifically to terrify junior attorneys. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a full head of iron gray hair swept back from a high forehead. His eyes were a flat, expressionless hazel, the kind of eyes that registered human suffering the same way a security camera does, recording it, storing it, feeling absolutely nothing about it. His voice was a deep, measured baritone that he wielded like a weapon, capable of reducing grown men to stammering apologies in under 30 seconds. He had 3 custom-tailored suits for every day of the week. His shoes were hand-stitched Italian leather. His watch, a vintage Patek Philippe, had cost more than most of the defendants who stood before him earned in 5 years. He lived in a sprawling lakefront estate in Winnetka. He drove a Mercedes S-Class. His vacation home in Tuscany had a private vineyard. None of this was funded by a federal judge's salary. Not even close. Raymond Holloway had been purchased methodically, completely, and over a very long period of time, by a network of men who needed a trusted gatekeeper at the center of Chicago's federal court system. Men who moved dirty money through legitimate-looking corporations. Men who needed wiretap warrants to mysteriously never get signed. Men who needed witnesses to suddenly find themselves facing unrelated federal charges right before they were scheduled to testify. The network was loosely called the Calumet Group, a collection of real estate developers, city aldermen, construction magnates, and old-money Chicago families with extremely dark histories and extremely clean public images. They had been operating in Chicago's shadows for 35 years. And for the last 20 of those years, Raymond Holloway had been their most valuable asset. He had never been investigated, never been seriously questioned, never once sweated in a courtroom because he was the courtroom. On a gray Tuesday morning in October, Raymond settled into his high-backed leather chair, adjusted his heavy robes, and surveyed Courtroom 1812 with the bored, sovereign gaze of a man who had never once questioned his own invincibility. The case before him today was a federal fraud trial, United States v. Meridian Capital Partners, a prosecution built around a sophisticated securities fraud scheme that had allegedly defrauded pension fund investors of $230 million. The real money, Raymond knew perfectly well, had flowed through the Calumet Group's shell network before being laundered so thoroughly it was unrecognizable. The lead defense attorney, a sleek man named Garrison Cole who wore French cuffs and a smile like a well-fed shark, had already messaged Raymond through their usual encrypted channel the night before. Standard procedure. Motion to strike forensic evidence. Chain of custody technicality on the financial records. Case dismissed. Don't keep me in suspense. Raymond had replied with a single word, done. The prosecution was being led by a young assistant U.S. attorney named Claire Nakamura, 29 years old, 2 years out of Georgetown law, still bright-eyed enough to believe that the justice system worked the way her textbooks described. Raymond had already identified which of her motions he would summarily deny. He had already decided that her key financial documents would be struck from the record before noon. What he had not anticipated, what no one in that courtroom had anticipated, was the witness the prosecution announced at 9:47 a.m. The government calls Dr. Serena Cross to the stand. Raymond didn't look up. He was scribbling a marginal note on his docket. Another government auditor. Another number cruncher they'd drag in to baffle the jury with acronyms before Raymond methodically dismantled her credibility and sent her home. He heard the back doors of the courtroom open, he heard footsteps, and then a feeling. There was no logical explanation for it. No rational accounting for the sudden, violent contraction in his chest, or the way the fine hairs on the back of his neck stood up simultaneously, or the cold that moved through him like a current despite the perfectly regulated 72 degrees of the climate-controlled courtroom. It was instinct. The ancient animal kind, the kind that fires in the body before the brain has time to process the signal. Something is wrong. Raymond looked up. She was 34 years old and she moved like she had been waiting her entire life for this exact moment. Doctor. Serena Cross walked down the center aisle of Courtroom 1812 with the contained, deliberate energy of someone who has not come to argue, who has come to end something. She wore a charcoal suit precisely fitted. Her dark hair was pinned back with mathematical severity. She carried a single slender folder under one arm. No briefcase, no notes, no anxiety. Raymond's eyes found her face, and for the first fraction of a second the recognition didn't fully assemble. His brain reached for the reference the way you reach for a word that's on the tip of your tongue, aware it exists, unable to grasp it. She was familiar in a way that felt like a half-remembered dream. Then she raised her right hand to take the oath, and the fluorescent light above the witness stand caught her eyes directly. Ocean blue, unblinking, absolutely cold, and Raymond Holloway's world came apart. He knew those eyes. He had last seen them 11 years ago, in the backseat of a car parked outside a federal building in the rain. A teenage girl, 16 years old, small for her age, with dark hair and those impossibly blue eyes that had looked at him through the rain-streaked window with an expression no 16-year-old should be capable of producing. Not grief, not fear, pure, patient, architectural rage. The Calloway girl, his brain screamed at him now, Maya Calloway's daughter. State your name and qualifications for the record, AUSA Nakamura said, her voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone trying not to show how nervous she was. Dr. Serena Cross, the woman said. Her voice was clear and steady and utterly without warmth. I hold a doctorate in forensic financial analysis from the University of Chicago. I spent 6 years as a senior investigator with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, before being appointed to head the Department of Justice's newly established Complex Financial Crimes Task Force. I specialize in the identification and dismantling of multi-layered money laundering architectures. I have personally led investigations that resulted in the conviction of 17 individuals, the seizure of over $800 million in criminal assets, and the dismantling of 4 major dark money networks operating across state and federal levels. The courtroom was very quiet. Garrison Cole glanced at Raymond with the beginning of confusion on his face. Raymond should have been radiating calm confidence by now. He should have been visibly bored. Instead, Raymond was sitting completely still with his hands pressed flat on his desk, and Garrison couldn't quite read his expression, which was, in 20 years of working with the man, completely unprecedented. Dr. Cross, Nakamura continued, her energy shifting upwards slightly as she sensed something she couldn't name. What did your independent audit of Meridian Capital Partners reveal? Meridian Capital Partners does not exist as a functioning financial entity, Serena said simply. It is a layered shell construction, specifically a fourth-tier subsidiary within a network of 22 interlocking shell companies. The actual investor funds, $230 million belonging to municipal pension holders, were moved in tranches through this network over a period of 7 years, cleaned through 2 offshore financial centers, and ultimately distributed to the controlling beneficiaries. And who are those beneficiaries? Objection. Garrison Cole stood smoothly, his practiced confidence reassembling itself. Your Honor, this line of questioning exceeds the scope of the indictment and constitutes, overruled. The word came out of Raymond's mouth before he had consciously decided to say it. Garrison blinked, looked at Raymond, looked away. Sat down slowly. He had just overruled them on a Calumet matter, for the first time in 20 years. But Raymond had looked into Serena Cross's eyes when Garrison stood up, and he had seen it, a single micro-expression, there and gone in less than a second. I dare you to stop me. And Raymond, for the first time in his life, was afraid to find out what happened if he tried. 11 years earlier, Raymond had not yet been a judge. He had been, and this was the exquisite, poisonous irony, a federal prosecutor. The best in the Northern District of Illinois by his own estimation and by most objective measures as well. He had a conviction rate of 91%. He was talked about as a future U.S. attorney. People mentioned him in the same breath as future gubernatorial candidates. He was also already on the Calumet Group's payroll. The case that changed everything, that truly cemented Raymond's arrangement with the network and launched his ascent to the federal bench, was United States v. Callaway. Daniel Callaway had been a mid-level compliance officer at Chicago's largest municipal credit union. He was 43 years old. He coached his daughter's soccer team on weekends. He read history books. He volunteered at his church's food pantry every third Saturday. He was also the man who discovered that someone had been systematically extracting funds from the credit union's low-income mortgage assistance program, a program funded by federal community development grants, and routing them through a series of transactions that were designed to look like routine interbank transfers but weren't. Daniel had gone to the FBI. He had walked into their field office on Roosevelt Road with a thumb drive containing 14 months of transaction records he had been quietly compiling, terrified, from his work computer. The FBI had handed the case to Raymond's office. Raymond had met with Daniel personally. He had shaken the man's hand. He had looked him in the eye and told him he was the bravest kind of citizen, a man who saw something wrong and refused to look away. That evening, Raymond had driven to a private dinner in Lincoln Park and handed a copy of Daniel's evidence to the men who were funding his future. What followed was elegant, in the way that truly evil things sometimes are. Raymond's office fabricated a counter-narrative. The real perpetrators, 3 Calumet-connected real estate developers, were quietly replaced in the investigative record by Daniel himself. Forged transaction authorizations in Daniel's name. A shell account in the Cayman Islands, opened using Daniel's stolen identity 6 months before he'd ever noticed the discrepancy, that had received 3 irregular wire transfers. Raymond had stood before the jury and delivered a closing argument that he later privately considered his masterwork of cynical theater. He painted Daniel Callaway as a calculating predator who had exploited a program designed to help struggling families buy homes. He quoted Bible verses about betrayal. He made a juror cry. Daniel Callaway was convicted on 11 federal counts. He was sentenced to 22 years. Raymond was appointed to the federal bench 8 months later. The Calumet Group threw him a private dinner in a private dining room at a restaurant that didn't appear on any public list. He had not thought about Daniel Callaway in 6 years. He had thought perhaps twice about the girl in the backseat of the car. Those blue eyes, I will remember everything about this. She had been 16, a child. Children moved on, children forgot. The funds, Serena Cross said, her voice filling every corner of Courtroom 1812, were distributed to 11 ultimate beneficiaries. 9 of those individuals are named in the sealed indictments that my task force delivered to the U.S. Attorney's Office at 7 o'clock this morning. The courtroom erupted. Not loudly, these were federal court observers, lawyers, reporters trained to maintain composure. But the sound that moved through the room was like a pressure change before a storm, a collective intake of breath, the rustle of bodies straightening, leaning forward, the faint, furious scratching of pens. 7 this morning, Garrison Cole repeated half to himself. He was no longer smiling. The 10th beneficiary, Serena continued, is Meridian's nominal CEO, Marcus Webb, who is already in federal custody as of this morning. She paused. The pause was not accidental. Everything Serena Cross did in this courtroom was intentional, had been intentional for a very long time. And the 11th, Nakamura asked. Serena did not look at the prosecutor, she did not look at the jury. She did not look at the reporters in the gallery, though she could feel them vibrating with attention like tuning forks struck simultaneously. She looked directly at the elevated mahogany bench. The 11th beneficiary, she said, is the man who has received $4,300,000 in Calumet Group payments over the past 19 years, routed through a series of blind trusts and offshore instruments into accounts held at 3 different international banks. Accounts opened in every case within weeks of favorable rulings in cases with Calumet connections. The evidence is documented, verified by independent forensic accountants at 3 separate institutions, and has been reviewed by the Office of the Inspector General, the FBI's Public Corruption Unit, and the Office of the Attorney General of the United States. She reached into her folder and removed a single document. She held it up. His name is on page 1 of Federal Criminal Complaint number 26 CR 4471, filed this morning in this district. His name is Raymond Holloway, and he is sitting right in front of me. What happened next was not like the movies. Raymond did not stand and rage. He did not pound his gavel and scream for the bailiff. He did not lunge for the door. He simply deflated. It was the most frightening thing anyone in that courtroom had ever witnessed, because Raymond Holloway had never, in 26 years, appeared to be anything less than an immovable force of institutional authority. Watching the substance go out of him in a single second, watching him become, before their eyes, a frightened old man in a black costume was deeply, viscerally disturbing. His voice came out wrong, too thin. That document is authenticated by digital certificate and chain of custody documentation that I am happy to walk through for the record, Serena said pleasantly. She set it down on the prosecutor's table. Take your time. Garrison Cole was on his feet. Your Honor, I must strenuously object on behalf of, sit down, Mr. Cole. The voice came not from the bench but from the back of the courtroom. The heavy oak doors had opened. 12 people walked through them, dark windbreakers, yellow letters, FBI. The lead agent, a tall woman with close-cropped silver hair and the bearing of someone who had done this many times before, walked down the center aisle at a measured pace. She did not hurry. She did not look around. She had the particular quality of someone who is precisely where they intended to be. She stopped at the bar and showed her credentials to no one in particular. Everyone in the room could see them clearly. Judge Raymond Holloway, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the silent room. I am Special Agent Dana Flores, FBI Chicago Field Office, Public Corruption Unit. I have a federal warrant for your arrest on charges including racketeering, wire fraud, bribery, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to suborn perjury resulting in the wrongful conviction of Daniel Joseph Calloway. Daniel, Raymond said. The name came out like it physically hurt him. Daniel Calloway is alive, Serena said. The room went absolutely still. He was released from federal custody 14 months ago when new evidence, specifically the original transaction records he submitted to the FBI, which were improperly destroyed but partially recovered from a DOJ server backup, was used to vacate his conviction. He is currently residing in the northern suburbs. He has been cooperating with this investigation for 11 months. Raymond stared at her. He told me everything, Serena said. Her voice was quiet now, almost gentle. The gentleness was somehow worse than the cold authority had been. He told me what you said to him in your office, that you would protect him, that you would take down the real thieves. A pause. He cried when he told me that part. Raymond's hands were flat on the desk in front of him and they were shaking. He's my father, Serena Cross said, and the last wall came down. People would ask her afterward how she had done it. How she had sat across from the man who destroyed her family and kept her voice level, kept her hands steady, kept her eyes clear. How she had built 11 years of education and investigation and legal strategy into a single hour in a courtroom and not felt anything crack. The truth was that she had prepared for this exact moment so many times, in so many ways, that it had become a kind of muscle memory. After her father's conviction, Serena's mother had moved them to her sister's house in Cincinnati. They had no money. The legal fees had taken everything. Her mother worked 2 jobs for 3 years before her health gave out. Serena applied for every scholarship she could find, worked 20 hours a week through her undergraduate years at Ohio State, graduated in 3 years because she couldn't afford a 4th, and got into the University of Chicago's doctoral program on a full fellowship. She had chosen forensic financial analysis with the same deliberateness that a surgeon selects a specialty, not because of passion, not because of market demand, but because it was the exact tool she needed to do the exact thing she intended to do. During her doctoral program, she had begun quietly building the file, not with anger, not with obsession. With the same meticulous, systematic precision her father had used when he first noticed the discrepancies in the credit union's records, the same precision that had made him a target in the first place. She traced the Calumet Group's financial architecture backward through public records, court filings, real estate transactions, and corporate registrations. She identified the shell company network. She mapped the flow of payments. She documented the correlation between Calumet-connected cases and Raymond Holloway's rulings with statistical rigor that would hold up to any academic or legal challenge. When she joined FinCEN after completing her doctorate, she had the institutional access to go further. International subpoenas, cooperation agreements with Swiss and Cayman regulatory authorities, bank records that no private investigator and no journalist could ever have obtained. She had not rushed. She had not cut corners. She had waited until every piece was in place, every witness identified, every document authenticated, every legal challenge anticipated and answered in advance. She had submitted her completed file to the DOJ's Office of Professional Responsibility 18 months ago. They had reviewed it for 6 months before concluding it was the most comprehensively documented judicial corruption case in the history of the Northern District of Illinois. The Attorney General had personally authorized the operation. She had requested one thing in return for her cooperation, that she be the one to present the evidence in court. On a gray Tuesday morning in October, she had walked down the center aisle of Courtroom 1812, and she had looked into Raymond Holloway's eyes, and she had watched him recognize her. And she had felt for the first time in 11 years that she could breathe all the way to the bottom of her lungs. "Put your hands behind your back, Mr. Holloway." Agent Flores had climbed the 3 steps to the bench, and 2 additional agents flanked her. They were not rough, they were not gentle. They were precisely professional, which was somehow the most devastating thing Raymond could have experienced, to be handled not with the rage of justice but with the administrative efficiency of a system processing him. He was Raymond Holloway. He had been a federal judge for 20 years. He had walked into this building every morning for 2 decades and watched crowds part for him, watched lawyers tense with anxiety when they saw him coming, watched the whole elaborate machinery of federal judicial authority orient itself around him like a compass needle finding north. He extended his wrists. The handcuffs clicked shut, the sound carried in the silent room with extraordinary clarity. "You set me up," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "This is entrapment. This is—" "Your own account set you up," Serena said. She had come to stand at the foot of the elevated bench, looking up at him, and despite the 3-step elevation of the judge's platform, the power relationship in the room had inverted so completely that she might as well have been standing above him. "Your own wire transfers. Your own blind trust, your own signature on 3 separate accounts. You built a very careful house, Mr. Holloway. I just drew up the demolition plans. I want my attorney." "You have the right to one," Agent Flores said, beginning to walk him toward the side door. "I'd recommend you use it." As they moved through the well of the court, the gallery, which had been holding its collective breath for the past 4 minutes, exhaled simultaneously. The reporters surged forward, held back by 2 agents positioned at the rail. Questions erupted. Camera shutters fired in rapid succession. The 2 lead defense attorneys sat completely motionless at their table, staring at the space where Garrison Cole's confident future had been and trying to process the speed with which it had evaporated. Raymond Holloway was walked through the door behind the bench, his door the door he had used every day for 20 years. The door that led to his private chambers and his reserved parking space and his private washroom with the heated marble floors, and he went through it for the last time in handcuffs. Serena watched the door close. She stood there in the silence for a moment, her folder in her hands, and she looked around the room. The shocked reporters, the stunned lawyers, the court reporter with her hands frozen over the stenograph. The bailiff who had worked in this room for 12 years and was quietly pressing 2 fingers to his forehead like he was checking for a fever. AUSA Nakamura appeared at her elbow. The young prosecutor looked like she had just watched a controlled demolition from 20 feet away, shaken, awed, trying to process the scale of what had just happened in the room where she had expected to run a routine evidence hearing. "I didn't know," Nakamura said quietly. "I mean, I knew you were coming in to testify on Meridian. I didn't know about—" "No one knew the full scope," Serena said. "That was deliberate. The more people who know, the more chances for the information to travel ahead of you." She looked at the door again. "The Meridian case will proceed before a new judge. The evidence is solid. You'll get your convictions. And Holloway will be prosecuted in the Eastern District to avoid any conflict of interest. The warrant covers 19 counts. The evidence on all 19 is complete." She picked up the black folder from the prosecutor's table and tucked it under her arm. "He'll die in federal custody." 3 months later, on a Tuesday afternoon in January when Lake Michigan was gray and wind-scoured, and the city felt like it was bracing against something larger than winter, Serena Cross sat across a small table from her father in the visiting room of a federal transitional residence in Evanston. Daniel Calloway was 54 years old. He looked older in some ways. His hair had gone fully gray during his 8 years of imprisonment, and there were lines in his face that had not been there before. But his eyes were clear and warm and entirely themselves, and when he looked at his daughter, he looked at her with a specific, uncomplicated gratitude that she found harder to receive than anything she had done in the past 11 years. "The sentencing is next week," she told him. He nodded. He already knew. 19 counts. The prosecutors are asking for life without parole. The guidelines support it. She paused. "I think he'll get it." Daniel was quiet for a moment. Outside, the wind moved against the windows. "Is it what you expected?" he asked. Finishing it, Serena thought about this honestly, the way she tried to do everything. "I thought it would feel like something ending," she said finally. "It feels more like something opening. She reached into her coat pocket. I have something of yours. She set a small object on the table between them, a pocket watch, brass and worn smooth with a small dent near the crown that had been there since before she was born. The winding stem was intact. The crystal face was uncracked. It had been logged into evidence at the federal building 11 years ago, on the afternoon of her father's arrest. Serena had submitted a formal evidence recovery request 8 months ago. It had taken 7 months to process. Daniel Calloway looked at the watch for a long time without picking it up. Then he reached out and pressed his palm over it and left it there. Your grandfather gave me that, he said. I know. I wound it every morning. It was the first thing I did when I woke up. I know, Dad. He picked it up, opened the case back with a thumbnail and old reflex completely retained, checked that the movement was running, closed it. Held it in his hand with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has been without something essential for a very long time. Thank you, he said. The two words were entirely inadequate, and both of them knew it, and neither of them tried to improve on them. Serena looked at her father sitting across the small table with his watch in his hand. She thought about Courtroom 1812, about the sound of the handcuffs, about the look on Raymond Holloway's face when he understood, truly understood. With his whole body, that the structure he had built his life on had been taken apart one carefully documented piece at a time by the 16-year-old girl he had glanced at through a rain-streaked car window 11 years ago and forgotten before he reached the end of the block. She had not done it out of hatred. That was the thing people didn't understand when they eventually wrote about it, and they wrote about it extensively because United States v. Holloway became one of the most widely covered federal judicial corruption cases in American history, generating 2 books, a documentary, and a congressional hearing on judicial oversight. She had not done it from a place of rage. She had processed the rage at 16. Sitting in the backseat of her aunt's car in the rain watching the federal building recede through the back window, and she had made a decision that was so cold and so clear and so absolutely free of emotion that it had almost frightened her. He will be held accountable. By me through the system he corrupted, using tools he cannot invalidate. That decision had been the organizing principle of her entire adult life, not as a burden, not as an obsession, but as a direction, a North Star. The thing that made every choice legible. Doctoral program, yes. FinCEN, yes. 11 months of voluntary cooperation with a federal investigation, yes. Does this serve the goal? Then yes, she looked at her father. Are you okay? She asked. He smiled. It was a complicated smile, 11 years of loss moving through it alongside something that might eventually become peace. I'm getting there, he said. He held up the watch. Wind it every morning, that helps. Serena Cross nodded. She felt the thing she had been carrying for 11 years, the compressed, contained architectural weight of an intention held so long it had become structural, begin quietly to release. Not all at once, not dramatically, just less. Raymond Holloway was sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole on a Friday morning in February. He stood to receive the sentence without expression. He had lost 40 pounds since October. His silver hair, which had been his most reliable physical vanity, had thinned visibly. He stood between 2 federal marshals and stared at a fixed point somewhere above the presiding judge's head and heard the words delivered, and he did not respond. The presiding judge, a woman named Carolyn Marsh, who had clerked in this district 20 years ago and had heard Raymond speak at a bar association dinner and thought him charming, looked at him for a long moment after delivering the sentence. I want to note for the record, she said, that this court finds particularly troubling the evidence establishing that the defendant leveraged his judicial position not merely for financial gain, but specifically to ensure the imprisonment of a man he knew to be innocent. The corruption here was not passive or incidental, it was active, it was targeted, and it destroyed the life of a citizen who came to this system in good faith seeking justice. She paused. The sentence reflects that. Raymond was walked out of the courtroom. In the gallery, Serena Cross sat in the second row. Her father sat beside her. He held his pocket watch in his right hand, turning it slowly over and over the way you worry a stone, and he kept his eyes on the front of the room until Raymond was gone. Then he exhaled. Then he turned to his daughter. She was already looking at him. It's done, she said. Daniel Calloway opened the pocket watch. The hands moved steadily in the quiet of the courtroom. The movement was exactly right. Yeah, he said softly, it's done. Outside Chicago was cold and gray and enormous. And the lake was the same color as the sky, and somewhere in the city, a man was being processed into the federal prison system for the rest of his natural life. And somewhere else in the city, 2 people were walking out of a courthouse into the cold January air, and the woman was thinking that she needed to take some time off finally after 11 years. and that she should learn how to wind a pocket watch. The ledger of justice is patient, it does not rush, it does not forget, and it always finds its way to zero.